This is TWiT.
We are joined today by Android Police's Ryne Hager, who is here to talk to us about a change in privacy coming to Android. Welcome to the show, Ryne.
Thank you for having me, Mikah. It's nice to meet you guys.
Nice to meet you as well, and good to chat with you. So let's kick things off by talking about Google's privacy sandbox. One of the first things that you note in your piece is that it's coming to Android from Chrome. So tell us about its current existence in Chrome, how it works there, before we kind of dig into what it could look like in Android.
So Privacy Sandbox in Chrome is part of Google's recent initiatives to sort of decouple how deep advertising ties into tracking. As you know, some of the name implies, it's all about respecting customer privacy. And as you mentioned, it originated on Chrome, and it's sort of bleeding over now into Android itself under the same sort of name, the same marketing. It's not going to be exactly the same. There's a difference between, you know, how cookies work on the web and how ad tracking works in mobile apps. But it's a similar approach in terms of adjusting how customers are being tracked to better ensure their privacy. But yeah, it's not exactly the same as the privacy sandbox that we might be familiar with from the web.
Now, how does it actually work on Chrome? How does the current privacy sandbox work? What does it protect you from? What's being sandboxed on the web if I'm using Chrome and I sort of enable this feature?
Well, the last that I had heard, and I haven't been following it as closely as I'd like to, because last year when they announced it, or 2 years ago when they announced it, it was still sort of a high level soliciting developer feedback and trying to determine exactly what sort of changes would be best for developers so that customer privacy can be respected while ensuring that they don't overstep their bounds or eliminate the sort of things that developers might actually need or ad providers might need that they can, you know, just change to doing in a more privacy respecting way. But
yeah, this makes sense. This is, yeah. So folks can kind of learn more about the Privacy Sandbox. Chrome developers page has a lot of information about it. And yes, it's more of kind of a proposals and a set of suggestions that folks can kind of follow. And then underneath kind of that overall look of things, they've got the Topics API, which we've talked about on this show before, and what was originally Flock, and kind of those changes that have taken place. And so this is an interesting thing.
So much of it has shifted recently. It's hard to keep track of because Flock died. Exactly. That's why I'm not quite sure where things stand right now. But I do know that they're trying to decouple from, you know, the direct sort of cookie-based tracking and that super granular approach and scaling things back.
Absolutely. So then let's talk about a future where this feature exists on Android. So you mentioned in the piece, and I think a lot of people have talked about the fact that Apple has a set of tools, the App Tracking Transparency, which is at its face, it's an option where when I launch an app on my iPhone, if that app wants to track me, then it needs to pop up a prompt that says, yes, I will allow you to track me, or no, I will not allow you to track me. And then it is up to kind of the app and the ways that it goes about sort of making use of that prompt and what that means. And I think that's where things get interesting. But do we know anything about what this could look like on Android in particular? Are we going to see prompts like this, or is this going to be kind of more of this sort of, oh, here are some suggestions for what you should do? What's kind of does this have teeth, I guess, is the question.
So Google's been a little nebulous in terms of describing exactly how all of this is going to work. And I think that's intentional. They don't want to scare developers too early because Apple's shift resulted in pretty substantial change. It was opt-in rather than an opt-out process. By getting this big prompt, you know, right at the when you fire up the app at the very beginning, most users are going to click no. Like, of course, I don't want to be tracked, right? Well, the recent studies indicate that there's been something like a 20 to 15% drop in advertising revenue for at least some applications on iOS as a result of this change because so many more users opt out. So I know a lot of Facebook's recent financial troubles have been attributed to this as well. And I don't think that Google is going to take the same approach, but they haven't really documented exactly how this change is going to work yet, in large part because, like with Privacy Sandbox on the web, this is the start of a conversation. They want to talk to developers. They have a handful of ideas. They know they want to do certain APIs. They want to have advertisers shift to less granular models of tracking, things like the Topics API and sort of Flock adjacent, less invasive methods of following people. But nothing is set in stone yet.
Mm-hmm. Now, what has anyone kind of jumped on board with this? Have there been any developers who've said, oh, yeah, this would be a good idea. This is something that we're willing to kind of play ball with? And I ask that because of the response, the reaction that we got from developers when Apple made these changes. And as you mentioned earlier, there had been a sort of cited drop in ad revenue. Is anyone going, you know what? No, we're not about this. Or is anyone going, you know what? Yes, we can make this happen. What's been the reaction thus far?
So in point of fact, a handful of high-profile developers did jump on board saying they were supportive of this decision. It's barely a decision. This is just a conversation that's starting. Though do note, Google says whatever changes are going to happen will be enforced within 2 years. Change is coming. We just don't know exactly what shape it'll take. But Activision Blizzard, a couple of other game developers, Rovio, I think, were on board with the change. Curiously enough, and drawing the connection directly to something we just talked about, Facebook is on board with the change. And that's sort of the endorsement you don't want. Graham Mudd, who does something in business products at Facebook, tweeted the other day that he was looking forward to the dialogue and the change. And that, for me, I thought the idea of a dialogue was a good idea until I saw Facebook is in favor of this. And that's not a good sign necessarily.
Yeah, that would kind of, because of the way that Facebook responded to Apple's app tracking transparency. And we saw I think now it's been 2 earnings calls where Facebook blamed Apple for it losing some of its money. And we've seen other companies do that. So for a company who seems to be paying a lot of attention to app tracking transparency type tools being an issue for them, to be on board with this is interesting. But I'm curious, do you think that part of it is because of the way that Google is handling this? I mean, your piece is entitled, Google doesn't want to pull an Apple with new ad tracking changes for Android. What does it mean to pull an Apple? And by Google not pulling an Apple, are they better kind of working with the industry to make change happen while kind of trying to make everyone happy?
So that's sort of a 2-part question. Pulling an Apple, I sort of just mean forcing a sudden and drastic change without regards to the market, which is a very Apple thing to do. You were the dictator, you're in charge, here's your walled garden, and you rule, you make the decisions within it. Google can't act in the same sort of way for a handful of different reasons. One of them is there's just an inherent difference in the app markets. So the Play Store and Android, as a result, depend very heavily on ad-subsidized models. Part of that has to do with its prevalence in emerging markets. Android's much more successful in places that are, just starting to grow when it comes to the smartphone market. But those markets also don't spend as much money on apps. So the ad-subsidized model is a firm requirement there for success, and that's part of why Android succeeds. But because of that, Google can't just come in and be like, hey, we're going to take away 20% of your revenue in 6 months because of this change we're just going to make that allows anyone to opt out of ad targeting. They want to do something that's more of a slow transition, something that allows the markets that they rely on for growth and the markets that depend on Android to adapt to the change a little more slowly. And some of the stuff they talked about during the call was the more familiar Privacy Sandbox stuff, Topics API changes, general API changes, trying to force ad providers into using a specific set of more privacy respectful APIs. Again, all of this is undocumented. We don't even know what sort of shape any of this would take yet or what kind of enforcement is going to happen. But that's what I mean when I say they don't want to pull an Apple, is they're trying to silo change a little more slowly in a way that developers can anticipate, that emerging markets won't get disrupted by, that sort of thing.
Understood. Now, some would say that Google switching from Flock to topics is a bit of a sort of a full-on faux pas, meaning that in the way that we've seen Google kind of behave in the past, where they release a thing, they announce a thing, and then they end up no longer supporting it. Rest in peace, Google Reader, for example, as well as any number of messaging apps. That is what this is. But I think that it could also be argued that this is simply the company truly putting its money where its mouth is when it says, hey, we're going to listen to feedback. We're working directly in a collaborative effort to come up with a solution. And so Flock changed to topics because of what people said. I'm curious about your perspective as a person who pays such close attention to Android and to Google. Do you think that it was a faux pas, like they were full on with Flock and they were going to release it? Or do you think that topics was the natural evolution and that we'll continue to kind of see this, that Android or that Google itself truly is, not being hypocritical and is saying, we will do what we say we're going to do, and we're going to work back and forth on a collaborative approach to ad tracking?
I definitely think it's more of a collaborative approach. I don't think that standards are products necessarily. Killing Google Inbox, the travesty that action was isn't on the same scale. Yeah, but it isn't on the same scale as like being like, oh, this particular standard, this implementation, we're not going to do this one, we're going to do this other one. Like we said, this is a dialogue still. They're trying to get feedback from developers, both in the web space, security researchers, mobile app developers. They want to make sure that this is something that doesn't disrupt their business while also ensuring that it does respect customer privacy. So it is a dialogue. I personally think some of the pushback against Flock wasn't merited. I thought the standard was fine. I know a lot of people disagreed. Something like that is going to happen. Topics isn't that different from it. We're going to end up with some system, some model that resembles it. Any of them are probably going to be fine, especially once researchers and the developer community has selected one, had time to test it, seen what its issues are. I'm not particularly concerned, and I don't think it really represents a lack of willingness to follow through on Google's part.
Understood. Well, Ryne Hager, I want to thank you so much for taking some time with us today to talk about this, to talk through this. It'll be interesting to see this collaborative approach go forward. We will include a link in the show notes to privacysandbox.com, which is the place where you can learn more about Google's whole approach to the privacy sandbox, its proposals and everything that goes forward. Of course, folks can head to Android Police if they want to follow you online. Is there anywhere else they should go to check out your work and follow you?
They can also check me out on Twitter. I'm at Ryne Hager, RYNEHAGER, because I spell my name funny. And that's about it.
All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.